Hello everybody, this is John Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-minute Histories videos. And today I'm off of Falls Road in the Hampden neighborhood, and I'm at a place called the Snyder Carroll Mansion. And if you're like me, you probably have not heard of the Snyder Carroll Mansion, but if I tell you it's the home of the SPCA, if you're like me, you're going to say, oh, I've been there lots and lots of times. And today we're going to talk about the Snyder Carroll Mansion and the SPCA. I'm thrilled to be joined by Jim Pierce, who is the head of the SPCA. But before I turn it over to him, I'm going to have to jump back to 1860, which is when the mansion was first built. It was built by a gentleman named Henry Snyder. We don't know a lot about Henry. We know he built the house. We know he terraced the lawn down to the Jones Falls, and we know he planted it with evergreens. Probably the reason the name Evergreen on the Falls got started. That's what this place was known as. But in 1864, he died. And that's it for Henry, at least for our story. His widow leased the house to a gentleman named James Hooper. You may not have heard of his name either, but Hooper was one of the key people who brought cotton to the Jones Falls mills. Before him, the mills were milling grain, but Hooper and his colleagues turned them into cotton mills, cotton duct, sailcloth, Meadow Mill, if you know where that is, that was one of his mills. Hooper only lived here briefly, and he turned it over to the Carroll family. David Carroll in particular was another chief miller of the time. Think Mill Number 1 and Whitehall Mill. Carroll didn't live here too long, but his son Albert did. Albert was the superintendent. The Carroll family was known as pretty progressive mill owners, I guess as mill owners went for the day. They did things other mill owners didn't do, like built a school for the kids of the families that worked for them and paid for teachers. They built a Methodist church, and they prohibited alcohol on company grounds, which was progressive for the time. The Carrolls owned the house until the early 1900s, and eventually the SPCA bought it in early 1920s. But I want to say two more quick things before we turn it over to Jim. One is about the other historic building on the property, and that's the gatehouse or pumping station for the old Hampden reservoir. If you lived in Hampden up until about 1960, you had a lake in your neighborhood. Today it's the park and the skateboard park next to it. It was part of the city's drinking water system. In the 19-teens, the city discontinued it and turned it into sort of an ornamental lake that the neighbors loved and fought for. At one point, they beat back the Baltimore Aviation Department, who proposed to put a heliport there. Not sure about that. Neighbors didn't want helicopters, but they couldn't hold out against the highway builders. When the Jones Falls Expressway was being built, the city negotiated a reduced contract price by allowing the contractors to put their excavated soil in the reservoir. So that was the end of the reservoir and the lake. Now we have a park. All right, final quick word is about the SPCA itself. It was started in the 1820s in London. Mostly its chief concern was the care of carriage horses, which were notoriously maltreated back then. We got our first SPCA in 1866 in New York, and Baltimore's not far behind, 1868. So we've been around a long time. From the very beginning, the folks involved have been passionate about animal welfare. Let me read you a quote about one woman who was a leader of the SPCA in the early 1900s. Her name was Mary Butler Shearer. This printed in one of the local newspapers is a story about how one icy winter day she came across a carriage driver beating his horses mercilessly as they slipped on the ice on Charles Street near the Washington Monument. In a fit of rage, she jumped up, grabbed the whip from the driver, and yelled at him, and here's what she said. She said, "I would think that God would strike you dead. It's a wonder he hasn't already." A force of nature for sure. The humbled and no doubt startled driver apologized and said he wouldn't do it again. Today, of course, the SPCA deals with loads of different types of animals, not just carriage horses, and loads of different issues, but I think carries that same passion for animal welfare that has been with it from the very beginning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Well, thanks, Johns. I'm Jim Pierce, Executive Director of the Maryland SPCA, and I've been here since 2017. As John said, we were founded in 1869, but we're an independent SPCA. All SPCAs are independent. That's a fun fact that most people don't know. So we started out looking after the city's workhorses. And as Mary Shearer, the story that you heard, we were defending against animal abuse. We installed city fountains, water fountains across the city. But it was in the 1900s where we shifted our focus into stray animals, in particular stray dogs. That was the issue of the day. And it was in 1926 that we purchased this property and all of the land surrounding in order to house animals that were being brought to the Maryland SPCA. Interestingly enough, Hampden, which is very dog-friendly today, in 1930 there was actually the city residents and the mayor put a legal challenge to try to take Evergreen on the Falls away from us because they didn't want animals, in particular stray dogs, in their neighborhood. So that's a fun fact. Fast forward to the 1950s, I believe it was. We were, up until 1950, the animal control function for the city of Baltimore. But it was in that year that our board of directors decided that we were going to cease that contract because the city wanted us to turn over dogs for medical research, and we were very against that practice. So that's when we stopped the contract for animal control. So fast forward to 1975, and that's when we started spaying and neutering animals on our site. And right behind the camera here, we have our what we call the pump house, which was built in 1861. Today, that's where all of our spay-neuter surgeries are done, and we do currently, I would say, about between 6,000 and 7,000 spay-neuter surgeries a year. Fast forward from 1975, when that started, we go into, let's go to say 1995. 1995 was the year where we stopped taking in other animals other than cats and dogs. We just simply didn't have enough space to handle peacocks that were on the property at the time, and sometimes I think we had a mule or a donkey here too, and some chickens and so forth. That all stopped in 1995. We just simply didn't have the space. In 2011, we remodeled and we renovated, and that's when the Morton Gorn Adoption Center that you see here on campus was built. That was a state-of-the-art facility at the time. And then fast forward to 2020, 9 years later, that's when we renovated the building here behind me. We have always stayed true to try to keep its inherent features, the fireplaces and the mantels, and while adding in some functionality of the 21st century, because it is the offices of the Maryland SPCA. All of our administration happens there, our finance happens there, communications and marketing happens in that building, and our education as well, education programs. And so today, the latest developments in the Maryland SPCA's evolution, constant evolution, we are focusing on supporting families that own pets. COVID taught us one big lesson. It really put financial hardships on the Baltimore families, and our mission today is to help pets and help people to improve their lives. And so we're shifting gears. We are still adopting out cats and dogs. 2/3 cats, 1/3 dogs is the ratio. And that's about 3,000 animals a year. In addition, we have opened a food pantry to help families that are having a hard time financially. So we're providing pet food, pet supplies so that they can keep their pets. The main goal is to keep pets out of the shelter. At the end of the day, as I like to tell our staff, we want to put ourselves out of business where there are no longer any homeless pets around the city of Baltimore.